Hey, you believers, non-believers, unaffiliated believers, sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers. Welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where we welcome converts, but where we think like disciples. This is a show where we apply theologic to all of life. And today I especially want to welcome so many new listeners. It's great to have you with me. I'm delighted to have you joining me. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to the clown prince of all clown princes, Mr. Salvador Dali. Oh, to the pain. I'm living in a warped Salvador Dali painting, and you can't make this stuff up. Get this. The new piece of legislation in Congress is being called the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022. Yes, that's right. They're naming a $370 billion bill the Inflation Reduction Act. Oh, this is so good, except it's so bad, right? Calling things the exact opposite of what they really are. I mean, boys can be girls, the police are the greatest threat to peace, only white people can be racists, the border is secure. President Trump was in bed with Russia, January 6th was a violent coup attempt. Despite the cost of everything having gone up 20%, we're not in an inflation. And now a massive spending bill is a means to inflation reduction. Well, you might be right to point out all those other doublespeaks, but at least Joe Biden got the most votes for president in all of American history. Yes, holy shnikes. I think I'm sensing a doublespeak pattern here. A doublespeak pattern here? Inflation Reduction Act? They're going to reduce the amount of money they're spending by spending $370 billion. It's remarkable. It's straight out of Orwell's Ministry of Truth. We're going to save you money by spending $370 billion. My listener, don't you wish you could tighten your belt, your financial belt, by spending more money? What a great deal. And relevant to this series, guess what the largest portions of Inflation Reduction Act will go to? Drum roll, please. Climate change and green energy. $60 billion for environmental justice priorities that will especially, quote, help disadvantaged communities. Vox reports that the bill will help community groups, governments, and tribes to qualify for $3 billion in block grants to clean up their neighborhoods and increase resilience against extreme weather conditions. And goodness, a paltry $500 million will go to heat pumps and critical rare earth minerals in order to boost manufacturing for energy-efficient technology. I wonder, where does the U.S. get much of its rare earth minerals? Oh yeah, China. So, is this just democratic kowtowing to China? Man, I smells me the rotting stench of grift. Yeah, well, we call it grift, but okay. If you went and looked in the back alleys of D.C., you'd see politicians, relatives, friends, cousins, all lining up to swill the hog trough known as climate change. It's really remarkable, except that it's not. It's strategic. Upper echelon progressives mean for this to bring the nation to its knees. And what do they have in mind for you? The aim of the bill for you? To take still more taxes. That's right. The bill contains $79 billion in funds so the IRS can hire more agents to weigh down upon regular citizens like you. What else is the bill about? pushing you away from driving your car or your truck, to rather force you to purchase an electric vehicle. I mean, Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg the other day just said that. We want you to buy an electrical vehicle. Stop driving your car. And then to the pain, push you to purchase solar panels and put them on the south-facing roof of your home. Do you have $11,000 laying around? And of course, maybe you knew that solar panels sound better than they actually are. I may return to the question of solar energy in a later episode, but for now, it's pretty clear that solar takes more out of the environment, mining raw materials, the fossil fuel energy necessary during the construction process. It takes more out of the environment than it can, to date, put back in. Scientist Bjorn Lomborg notes that today the United States has enough solar-powered batteries across the entire nation to store just 14 seconds of average daily United States electrical use. As they are currently built, solar panels can't even replace the energy required to build them. So, what will the anti-reduction inflation bill really do? Well, it'll do things like increase the cost of energy, swell the cost of gasoline, brutalize folks on fixed incomes, exacerbate societal suffering, suffering that the politicians will, later, ride into the middle of and declare, "Howdy! We're from the government and we're here to help." Inevitably, it'll help lead to meltdown and suffering. It is purposefully designed to do just that. Upper echelon progressives mean for this to bring the nation to its knees. And following the way these things have gone over the last 20 years, buckle your seatbelts, folks, because the price of everything is about to go up. Inflation's already at 20%. I just went to the grocery store today. Inflation is at 20%. I don't care what they're saying. And even with all that, now with this reduction inflation bill, you ain't seen a nothing yet. It's just genius at the most cynical of levels. Spend more to reduce inflation. Why? Well, for starters, the feds are increasing the corporate tax to 15%. And do you think those big companies will just sit still and power munch that 15% down into their gullets? Really? Can you buy oceanfront property in Iowa? Moreover, the feds now will be charging oil companies $10 per acre. That's up $8 from the normal $2 per acre as we now have it. They'll begin charging oil companies $10 per acre to do business on federal lands. Again, the price of gas and natural gas necessarily must go up. What else? This bill will work diligently to reduce carbon emissions by roughly 40% by the year 2030. Right. We've seen this in this casting of the pod series, how well reducing carbon emissions has worked for Western Europe. The last 20 years of efforts in Germany, for example, to go green has caused the price of electricity there to double. So we know now that reducing carbon emissions is Pig Latin for increasing the cost of energy. Plan und simple. And as we all now too painfully know, when the price of energy goes up, the price of everything goes up. Electricity blackouts will be more in play than ever. Your cost for at-home electricity is about to go, how you say, skyward? And then why? Why now? Because the Democrats know they are likely to get slaughtered in the November midterms. Well, goodness. That is, if they can't between now and then figure out a way to steal the elections. At least Joe Biden got the most votes for president in all of American history. So, you better pass this ESG-driven spending bill now before they lose the levers of power. What can you, my listener, do? Well, for starters, pray. Pray that just one Democratic senator will have either the common sense or the courage to oppose this looming storm. Reduction Spending Act. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's doublespeak through and through. On the personal front, here at the Homestead, last week we went camping down in southern Idaho. Despite my having gotten 48 mosquito bites, we had a good time. We happened to be in a little village called Glenn's Ferry, named after a late 19th century man, Gustavus Glenn. At the time he was a horse and oxen freighter. He built a ferry there in 1869 to cross the treacherous Snake River. And the thousands of folks per year who trekked by foot from Independence, Missouri to Oregon City, Oregon, used Glenn's Ferry to get across the Snake. Tanya and I drove up onto the southern bluffs so we could look down on the town and see where the Oregon Trail pioneers would. For 4 decades prior to Glenn's Ferry being constructed, they would cross the Snake. And it was a place known as Three Island Crossing. They would brave the river currents. They'd wade in with their wagons and mules and oxen. And many, too many, not knowing how to swim, drowned right there, right next to where we were camping. Many others had their wagons full of necessary goods for the remaining 6-week walking trip to Oregon. They had their wagons tip over in the river right there. And seeing that slice of history, seeing where people lost their lives, the precise location where people had taken enormous risk to better their lives, it was all inspiring for me. We also visited a nearby historic visitor center where they had artifacts and biographies and diaries from some of the folks who crossed the Snake River right there, not far again from the campground where we were staying. Like I say, I was inspired. People walked roughly 2,000 miles in order to better their lives. They endured freezing temperatures when they headed out of Missouri in early to mid-March. They endured snakes and mosquitoes and wolf packs. They lived through temperatures in the low 100s in the desert Idaho summers of July and August. They endured, or not, cholera, because the greatest killer on the Oregon Trail was cholera. How does cholera kill you? Through diarrheal dehydration. Something like 20,000 folks died from cholera alone. And they had no antibiotics for the wounds they suffered. And I have to imagine that in pushing their wagons up hills and out of muddy bogs and chopping firewood and clearing trails that they had plenty of wounds. I mean, I've been hiking many times. Blisters can get infected, right? Oh, I could go on. The Oregon Trail was just an amazing feat of human strength and ingenuity. And it's not like that was the only place that's ever happened on the planet. Everywhere has happened on the planet. But I just happened to be right there where 19th century in-action history took place. So because I love history, I ordered 2 books about the Oregon Trail. And maybe into the future, I'll be telling you more about this amazing piece of American history. But me, I've said before, I love people who can do things. And I'm inspired even by people today who take risks to better their lives. Because those 19th century folks, they had killer resolve. Amazing. You know who else had resolve? Jesus of Nazareth. If you read through the Gospels, you'll be astounded at his resolve. And for years I would lecture on Jesus, pointing out how ferocious he could be as he looked straight into the eye of the wolf. But thinking still further about it, I think a better word than ferocious is resolve. Jesus didn't waffle. He didn't seem to ever qualify his remarks, never said things like, hey, I know what I just said there was hard to swallow, but really, I'm just saying it out of love. No, he left his harsh words awkwardly hanging so they'd have full effect. He intended to jolt people. He believed something was on the line. He intended to stun them. And he hoped that his blunt tone would shock them out of their sheeple stupor and bring them to repentance. And clearly, man, in all of that, Jesus saw himself in continuity with the prophets. He said things like, "It'll be better for a millstone to be tied around your neck than that you've wounded one of my little ones," Luke 17:2. And he said it'll be more tolerable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment than for those who've rejected me and my gospel, Matthew 10:15. It was harsh stuff, all reflecting Jesus' own resolve. I mean, no one ever knew oneself the way Jesus knew himself. He was fixed. He was fixed. He was grounded in his relationship to the Father. He never wavered from the mission that the Father had for him. He called a spade a spade. He never soft-sold a single thing, not one. Again, he saw himself in continuity with the Old Testament prophets. He was, in that way, clearly a social prophet. And today, we have social prophets. They may not even all be Christians, but they see the infection that plagues our society and risking their own safety, risking their careers, risking of all dear things being disliked, they call out the infection. And there's no healing unless we accurately diagnose the disease, right? And I'm thinking of people like Candace Owens and Matt Walsh, Dennis Prager, Jason Whitlock, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson. I'm also thinking of agencies like Judicial Watch and Project Veritas. There are many others. But these are all people and organizations who look the wolf straight in the eye and dare to name it for what it is. They don't flinch. They can't flinch. They know that if the hungry gray wolf sees you flinch, you'll quickly be attacked for being vulnerable. They've watched how the wolf pounces on its very own when they show even a flicker of weakness. And these social prophets, most of them are theists, if not confessing Christians. And me, I admire them. I admire their courage. I admire their resolve. Lord, keep today's social prophets safe. Protect them from the wiles of the evil one. Use them to call our nation to repentance. Use them to bring our nation to change, Lord, and repent of its sins. Bring it to godly righteousness and to acknowledge capital T truth. And Abba, fill your church with a resolve to stand for a Christian worldview and biblical morality. Amen. Because you guys, there are things worth standing for. An increasingly important thing to stand for in our relativistic era, again, capital T, truth. As I noted in this series' opening episode, science is always open to new developments. Science rests on proof. And no, science is not omniscient, but it does rest on established proof or proofs. But the very nature of science is one of openness. Open to discoveries, open to repeated testing, open to theories that better explain the given, except when it comes to climate change. If you've seen one of my Facebook posts where I'm trying to promote my podcast, you'll see that each and every post is accompanied by a not asked for, not granted permission to post by Facebook itself. Quote, they say, "See how the average temperature in your area is changing." And then they have a button there, a tab that you can click, Explore Climate Science Info. And without even clicking on that, we know the fix is in, right? I mean, if science is open, let alone if the First Amendment is still the First Amendment, if science is open, then there's no threat from my posts. But because there is an agenda, Facebook feels the constant need to be the big brother to my posts. It's so sad. This is the era we now live in. And if we don't collectively push back, this era will be followed by much darker, more sinister eras to follow. And as I've said repeatedly, that will only lead to greater and greater suffering and less justice and more poverty and more generational brokenness. Man, there are things worth standing for. Each and every time I see someone helping me promote the UU podcast, my heart glows with gratitude. I'm not kidding. You have no idea how difficult it is to advertise a podcast. So I'm thankful for those who graciously help me to get the word out there. Recent friends who've done just that include Victor S., Scott M., Irene A., Joanna J., Barbara M., Glenn T., and Shard J. Thanks, you guys. My listener, all you have to do is copy and paste a UU URL feed from Instagram or Facebook and post it to your own social media post. Again, danke. Science. Let's dig into more seminal scientific information for our understanding of weather and how the weather changes and what the most important factors are for understanding the weather. Today, the sun. Now, really, it's no wonder ancient civilizations worshipped the sun. I mean, in Genesis 1, verses 14 through 19, the author describes Yahweh's lordship over both the sun and the moon. That author knew that the ancient Egyptians, among others, worshipped the sun. Ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs portray Pharaoh with the sun on his head, the great Amun-Ra. Over in the United Kingdom, across the span of some 1,500 years, some ancient people, Celts, Druids, they built Stonehenge, a huge rock. They used 25-ton rocks. It is a huge rock artifice that aligns perfectly with the sun at both summer and winter solstices. But back in Egypt, they also built temple complexes that aligned with the summer solstice. One pharaoh, Akhenaten, even banned worship of the other gods and commanded the worship of the sun, the solar disk they named Aten. The sun, it's well known, has a dramatic effect on life here on Earth. And today, honest scientists know and admit that the sun is the primary driving force of Earth's climate. Professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences Ian Plimer writes, quote, "The sun provides Earth with a staggering amount of energy. It drives weather, ocean currents, and evaporation and provides the energy for life on Earth," end quote. That's from his book, Heaven and Earth, Global Warming, the Missing Science. Not only all that, the sun, Plimer continues, quote, provides the energy for photosynthesis. Like a big incandescent reactor, the sun emits huge amounts of energy to the earth. And the truth is, you guys, it's really miraculous. The earth is in just the optimal position in relation to the sun for life to exist on our planet. And just for funsies, Earth is 91.863 million miles from the sun. Man, 92 million miles? That's how far it seemed when I was driving Southern California's 405 freeway from the Orange County area to Thousand Oaks on a weekend. If we were just a little closer to the sun, we'd be too hot. Our oceans would boil to non-existence, kind of like the planet Venus, which is 100 times hotter than Earth. Or if we were just a little further away from the sun, we'd be too cold for life to exist. The oceans would turn into giant skating rinks, kind of like the planet Mars, where a normal day's temperature is minus 90 degrees. Or, as it's called in Minnesota, time to ice fish. But Earth's relation to the sun is not only a matter of degrees. No, the sun does other favors for us besides pleasantly warming our evening summer back patio gatherings. For instance, Plimmer says when the sun is energetic, it blasts away cosmic radiation, which causes Earth to have less low-level clouds, which causes the planet to reflect energy back into space, and in all of that, the Earth warms. But, Plimmer says, when the sun is weaker in its shining toward Earth, that cosmic radiation forms more low-level clouds, which in turn reflect energy back into space with the result that Earth's surface cools, end quote. And the truth is, the sun and clouds are the primary engines for our weather. And to me, you guys, that's really interesting. Not being a scientist, I always just sort of wondered, figured, intuited that weather was primarily affected by the oceans and how oceans and their warming and cooling patterns produce clouds and how water evaporation and cloud formation then drifted or were blown over the continents to produce our weather patterns. But actually, yet, the true driver of cloud formation, the sun's effects of blasting away or not, cosmic radiation, which again is the primary driver of cloud formation and hence our weather patterns. The sun, the too oft neglected in climate change alarmism sun, is powerful. When the sun's output changes, it can be felt in the span of a human lifetime. That's how quick the sun's rays reach Earth. The sun is powerful. Let me give you a few factoids from scientist Plimmer to that end. I'm quoting for these next couple sentences. Every second, the sun delivers to Earth the total amount of energy released by an earthquake of Richter magnitude 8. The amount of energy humans collectively use annually is delivered from the sun to the Earth in 1 hour. The known recoverable resource of oil on Earth contains the energy that the sun delivers to the Earth every 36 hours. Mind-blowing. Well, the truth is the sun is not the only player in all of this. The Earth's orbit is significant too. We are affected by the other 8 planets, or 7 if you don't count Pluto. Hey, don't you dare exclude my buddy Pluto. We are affected by the other planets and their gravitational force as we all orbit the sun, each on our respective orbital pattern. Oh, can I give you a quick aside? When's the last time you heard a politician mention Earth's orbital pattern as involved in the complexities of our climate? That's right. I guess that's just too much nuance for a political rally speech. Orbital patterns are more complicated than celebrities or politicians screeching, "You have no right to leave the lights on in your winter home." No, orbital patterns and the understanding of that is nuanced. Nuance you, beauty you. But let me get back to planet orbits. It's mind-blowing to me. Scientists in the early 1900s knew that there was likely another then hidden planet in our galaxy based on the orbital pattern of Neptune. Sure enough, as theorized, Clyde Tombaugh discovered the existence of Pluto in 1930. Pluto was the planet that was affecting Neptune's own orbit. And my point for telling you that, besides the fact that I just find it fascinating, the point is that this stuff can be studied and measured. But in our POMO society, that kind of nuance constantly gets ignored. And remember what I said a couple shows ago about ignorings? The things that really should be discussed but which aren't? The scientific factors which really do come into play but which get conveniently overlooked? When that happens, it's a tell. And when those facts are ignored, we know we are staring into the face of a wolf. And the climate change wolf, it doesn't like inconvenient facts. It ignores data that undermine the preferred agenda. It insists that you say it the way it says it, or growls it, or else. And there's no grace, no room, no quarter. And so, we know it's a meme. We know it's a billboard. We know, in short, that it's playing us. Before I get into some of the emotional energy that's latent within the climate change movement, I want to give you one more tidbit of scientific insight on all of this, and it concerns dust. Dust influences our planet's weather patterns. Dust comes from various places, volcanoes, human activities, and even space. So, space dust matters. Our solar system has a big space dust cloud through which the Earth orbits. Scientist Bjorn Lomborg notes that, quote, measurements from high-flying aircraft show that some 40,000 tons of extraterrestrial dust drops to Earth each year. Amazingly and beneficially, that space dust includes helium and minerals and amino acids, which are the building blocks of life. And it includes chemicals that can only form from being blasted by cosmic rays, end quote. And if you can believe it, if you give it enough time, as noted in one study of 800,000-year ice cores, Earth's dust accumulations contribute to the planet's enduring ice ages. Space dust helps to equal ice ages. That's wild stuff. Dust accumulation is a factor in the amount of growth trees can undergo. Studies of Earth's dust accumulation play into how scientists study the history of Earth's weather patterns and climate, and we can better understand the future if we know significant things about the planet's past. But I convey all of that to you today about the sun and dust to say this is very complicated stuff. And I've never heard a climate change prophet of doom recount the effects of space dust on our planet. No. All I hear is how humanity is wrecking the planet, how humanity is bad for the planet, and how me driving a truck is especially bad for the planet. And it's all narrowed to make us fear. Yeah, the heartbeat of coordinated climate change is the energy of fear. The climate change champions know that fear is a powerful motivator. Advertisers, media moguls, and politicians know that all too well. But I want you to listen to one of the most poignant things I've read in a few years about the era in which we find ourselves. For 50 years, Western nations had maintained their citizens in a state of perpetual fear. Fear of the other side. Fear of nuclear war, the communist menace, the Iron Curtain, the evil empire. And over in communist countries, the same was true in reverse. They feared us. And then suddenly, the fall of 1989, it was all finished, gone, vanished, over. The fall of the Berlin Wall created a vacuum of fear. Nature abhors a vacuum. Something had to fill it. Enter the climate crisis. We had radical fundamentalism and post-9/11 terrorism to make us afraid, and those are certainly real reasons for fear, but that's not the point. The point is there is always a cause for fear. The cause may change over time, but the fear is always with us. Before terrorism, we faced the toxic environment. Before that, we had the communist menace. The point is, although the specific cause of our fear may change, we are never without fear itself. Fear pervades society in all its aspects. Has it ever occurred to you how astonishing the culture of Western society really is? Industrialized nations provide their citizens with unprecedented safety, health, and comfort. Average lifespans increased 50% in the last century, and yet modern people live in abject fear. We're afraid of strangers, of disease, of crime, of the environment. People are afraid of the homes they live in, the food they eat, the technology that surrounds them. We are in a particular panic over things we can't even see: germs, chemicals, additives, pollutants. People are timid, nervous, fretful, and depressed. And even more amazingly, people are convinced that the environment of the entire planet is being destroyed around them. Remarkable. Like the belief in witchcraft, it's an extraordinary delusion, a global fantasy worthy of the Middle Ages. Everything is going to hell and we must all live in fear. Amazing. How has this worldview been instilled in everybody? Because although we imagine we live in different nations, France, Germany, Japan, the United States, in fact, we inhabit exactly the same state, the state of fear. How has that been accomplished? Well, in the old days, citizens of the West believed their nation states were dominated by something called the military-industrial complex. President Eisenhower warned Americans against it in the 1960s, and after 2 world wars, Europeans knew very well what it meant in their own countries. But the military-industrial complex is no longer the primary driver of society. In reality, for 3 decades now, we have been under the control of an entirely new complex, far more powerful and far more pervasive than the military-industrial complex. It's called the Political Legal Media Complex, the PLM. And it is dedicated to promoting fear in the population under the guise of promoting safety. People don't feel they are safe because of the PLM. And the PLM, again, the Political Legal Media Complex, is powerful and stable precisely because it unites so many institutions of society. Politicians need fear to control the population, hence abrupt climate change fear-mongering. Lawyers need dangers to litigate and make money. The media needs scare stories to capture an audience. Together, these 3 estates are so compelling that they can go about their business even if the scare is totally groundless. I'm telling you, this is the way modern society works, by the constant creation of fear. And there is no countervailing force. There is no system of checks and balances, no restraint on the perpetual promotion of fear after fear after fear after. But think, if it's not all right to falsely shout fire in a crowded theater, why is it all right to shout cancer in the pages of the New Yorker, when that statement is not true? At the very least, we're talking about a moral outrage. And so we should expect our religious leaders, the Pope, the Archbishop of Canterbury, denominational officials, and our great humanitarian figures all to be crying out against this waste of energy and emotions, and the needless deaths around the world that result from all this, from such fear-mongering. But do any religious leaders speak out? No, quite the contrary. They join the chorus. Dear God, religious leaders join the chorus. They promote what would Jesus drive, as if they have forgotten that what Jesus would drive is the false prophets and fearmongers out of the temple. We are talking about a situation that is profoundly immoral. It's disgusting, if truth be told. The political legal media complex callously ignores the plight of the poorest and most desperate human beings on our planet in order to keep fat politicians in office and rich news anchors on air and conniving lawyers in Mercedes-Benz convertibles. Oh, and university professors in Volvos. Let's not forget them. The point is this. The modern state of fear could never exist without universities feeding it. There is a peculiar neo-Stalinist mode of thought that's required to support all this, and it can thrive only in a restrictive setting, behind closed doors, without due process. In our society, Only universities have created that. The notion that these institutions are liberal is a cruel joke. They are fascist to the core, I'm telling you. And you guys, what I read there for the last 6-7 minutes, that was Professor Hoffman in Michael Crichton's fiction book, State of Fear, HarperCollins, the year 2004. All of that was spoken by a fictional character, but it couldn't possibly be more true. When I first read it, I had to sit down and stop and think, because that's some heavy stuff, critical stuff, and I'm afraid, pun intended, it's important stuff. We do. We do live in a perpetual state of fear. And climate change is just the most recent focal point to drive wide, sweeping fear. It was COVID for 2 years. They're still trying to generate that one. But climate change is now a $370 billion reduction spending bill. Climate change. If you know me, you know I'm enthralled with thinkers who are prescient, pre-scientia, pre-knowledge, abidingly pre-seeing, prescient. Class, say prescient. Prescient, teacher. People who are prescient see and know things that are true long into the future, or even before the future comes to pass. And I love it not just because they see things, but because they see more deeply. They see with more piercing truth. Prescience. It's more valuable than reading the tea leaves or having a crystal ball. And so Michael Crichton, writing that 18 years ago about Professor Hoffman on the state of fear, he was right to call just that a state of fear, because everything around us promotes a sense of fear. And fear, it makes the sheeple in us cry out for a deliverer. I think that's why people want politicians to be messianic figures. But me? No. I'm not looking for a political messiah. I don't believe any one human leader can save us from the looming cultural Marxist onslaught. True, yes, daily I cry out for Holy God to deliver us all, to wake His remnant, the Christ-confessing church. Because it'll only be if the church awakens. It'll only be if the church resolute begins to speak with conviction and courage. It'll only be if the embodied bride of Christ, the church, rallies to the fray that there's any hope for our nation, and with it, the hope of a Christian cultural presence here in America. I've said it before, you guys, but I'm going to say it again. When you find a bold Christian leader, prop him or her up like no other. Bless them, pray for them, encourage them, support them. Because with all-encompassing, economy-crushing agendas like reduction, inflation, climate change, we need bold social prophets like never before. I mean this truly. Thank you for joining me. I am honored. Please go now, everyone, and turn your beautiful God-given brains on.